Hello, welcome to Roy's Book Reviews. Today is August 6th, 2019, and I was planning on posting my second YouTube book review for the novel 11/22/63 by Stephen King. Instead, I learned earlier today when I went online that my favorite author of all time, someone who I, along with many others, considers to perhaps be the greatest American and greatest overall writer of all time, Toni Morrison, has passed away. I don't have the words to express how much this saddens me, but on the other hand, I am extremely grateful for the books that she wrote throughout her career. The books that I have already read and gotten great enjoyment from, and the books of hers that I have not gotten to yet and look forward to eventually diving into. She has received many accolades, as you know: Pulitzer Prize, Nobel Prize, every award under the sun that can be given to an author has been given to Toni Morrison. All of it and more is well deserved. Most of my reviews of Toni Morrison books that I've written online on Goodreads are rather short because her way with words is so incredible that I often can't think of anything to add beyond extraordinary, wonderful, incredible, amazing. And that about covers it. You could find a synopsis of her books anywhere. But to describe the impact, the power, the beauty of her words is something that is simply beyond my humble efforts. Nevertheless, I am going to discuss a couple of her books here on the date of her passing. The first one is The Bluest Eye, which is a book that tackles the subject of colorism. There are a lot of books written and a lot of talk in society today about the topic of racism, specifically white racism, anti-black people. But there is far fewer books written about colorism within the African American community, even though perhaps it stems from the outward gaze from Europe, from white people telling black people for centuries that the lighter the skin, in other words, the closer to white, the better, and the darker, the uglier. This is a message that has been very effective, and many black people have basically taken these teachings and as gospel, and colorism now is mostly black on black crime, I guess, in a way, or even a person feeling about themselves that they are unattractive and they are not worthy to be considered an attractive, a beautiful person because of the pigmentation of their skin. And this is something that Toni Morrison takes head on in her novel, The Bluest Eye. About it, I wrote, "This novel, by one of our finest writers, explores the thorny topic of what constitutes beauty and how a woman is adversely affected when she does not fit the stereotypical profile. If society refuses to see your beauty, the logical conclusion is that you are ugly And if so on the outside, then probably on the inside as well. When you take such a false belief strongly to heart, at what point does the fault cease to belong exclusively to those who created and perpetuated the myth and begin to fall on you for accepting it without questioning? So that's what I wrote about The Bluest Eye. It's an extraordinary novel, which is something that can be said about pretty much any Toni Morrison novel. She has written quite a few incredible works. The one that she receives the most accolades for is probably Beloved. I would say that my own personal favorite is Jazz. I believe she won the Pulitzer Prize for Jazz. But rather than review that one, I am going to give my thoughts on a more recent Toni Morrison book, Home. About that, I wrote, "The divine Toni Morrison has been giving us shorter novels to enjoy lately. As with A Mercy, which is another wonderful Toni Morrison book, Home comes in at an intimidating page count." I'm not sure if I bungled that or not. I tried to say unintimidating. But in this novel, in addition to brevity, it can easily be read over the course of a day if you have some spare time. We are also gifted with greater accessibility. Many non-book readers and non-literary fiction readers steer clear of Toni Morrison because her exquisite use of language does not make for light reading. As I've said on this channel in the past and other videos, even though most of those haven't posted yet, so perhaps you don't know it, I tend to read literary fiction. It's my favorite type of book to read, but I do understand that plenty of other people prefer books that are more accessible, more popular writing, that whether it falls into a genre category or not, is less poetic and more just straightforward than many of the books of Toni Morrison. So even though she has a huge readership, there are plenty of people who have not read her books yet because they are intimidated by her use of language, which, somewhat like the way people steer clear of Shakespeare unless they're told they have to read Shakespeare for a class. Toni Morrison obviously writes in modern language, not in Old English, but still, it is not, most of her books are not written in a way that you can just turn your brain off and just casually turn the pages. You do have to pay attention to the structure of her sentences and the beauty of the language. But in some of her books, such as Home, she does show that she can write stories that are kind of not just for fans of literary fiction, but just pretty much for anyone. Her poetic verse can be challenging to those unable or unwilling to sit still and focus. If you have been avoiding her magnificent body of work for those reasons, avoid no more. Home is the book for you. Morrison's prose remains as lush and eloquent as ever, but is more straightforward here than in previous books. Faithful fans will get their fill, and I encourage new ones to jump on board as well. Just don't expect a leisurely beach read. She's not going quite that far. A synopsis of Home comes easily, contained in one sentence. A veteran of the Korean War, haunted by blood-soaked memories of his time there, returns to his hometown in Georgia to rescue his ailing sister. Along the way, Toni Morrison paints the backdrop of their lives. C has spent the majority of hers dependent on the kindness or lack of displayed by those she encounters via circumstance. Frank comes back to save her, but in order to claim and do something of worth with his life, with her life, she realizes she must develop her own inner strength. Frank is wrestling too many demons to always reliably be her hero. Much has changed over the course of the years since Frank last set foot in the town where they were raised. Plenty remains more or less the same. Home is there to provide familiar comforts, even though our return to it is inevitably in the form of a different version of ourselves. So that's what I had to write about the novel Home by Toni Morrison. And what I have to say about her in general is that she is the most gifted writer. She's the greatest African American writer of all time, the greatest woman writer of all time, the greatest writer of all time, in my opinion. And I am deeply saddened by her passing. But hopefully, there will now be greater examination of her work, and perhaps we'll get more movies, miniseries based on her stories, and more people will come around to realize what a gem that we had in her. Rest in peace, Toni Morrison. You will be sorely missed, but since you left your works behind, you live forever.